Created by the Pennsylvania State Association of Boroughs, Inside Pennsylvania Boroughs connects you to legislation and policy that will affect you and your family. Your host, Chris Kapp, and his guests discuss current affairs that matter to you most. Connect with your state by tuning into Inside Pennsylvania Boroughs on Sundays here on PCN.
We're here with Senator Andy Dinniman, a Democrat from Chester County. He also teaches at Westchester University. Senator, with many college students returning to school in August, what is the status of in-person learning at the 14 universities in the state system of higher education?
It's mixed. Westchester, for example, is all online. Cheney is in person.
Is there any information that tells us that college students do better in-person learning versus online?
I think the research is mixed as well. Those college students certainly do better than students in basic education.
Well, what challenges are there for public school students returning to school this fall?
The challenges are enormous, to say the least. Many of the schools have said they're going to stay online. Others are using a blended or hybrid approach. We know, it's clear, that basic education students, especially those in the lower grades, learn much better and more effectively in the classroom than they do online. Yet, we have so many students being taught online, both last spring and now this fall, and I'm afraid we're going to lose a whole generation of students if we're not careful.
What can be done to ensure that students don't fall behind when they're learning online?
Well, what can be done is a number of things. In fact, I've put together, with the support of the majority chair, a six-part package of bills to assure that learning actually takes place. First, we have to understand what online learning is all about. It requires, if a teacher's giving a lesson, or that be stored, that be recorded, so that students can access it at any time. Second, we must make sure that if the parents are going to be parent coaches, now teacher coaches, that they also receive pertinent and important information. We also need, though it's online, to make sure that we have some type of discussion with the students. Why are you online? What's happening? Many young people are simply afraid. I mean, just think about it when you or I were 5 or 6 years old and didn't understand everything going on. Also, two more aspects that I believe are important. One is we should simply do away with standardized testing. This year, as we did last year, already a number of states led by Georgia is requesting that. And one of the difficulties is some students simply do not have the experience or have never learned online. It's not enough just to give someone a Chromebook and say, learn, especially if the parents aren't familiar as well. So one of my bills in this package would create a system of volunteers. And these the programs they create could be replicated. For example, we have already started the basis in this county, working with IU, of a retired teacher teaching corps who would volunteer. I've also begun discussions with teacher education programs, because remember, teachers don't do student teaching now. But what they could do for that practicum is work hand in hand with a student who is having difficulty in learning using the phone or other social media. So I think what we have to do is understand not everyone is learning. The students who are being hurt the most are poor students coming from impoverished areas, non-English learners, and one of my bills would say that there has to be a simultaneous translation, which is relatively inexpensive for the non-English learners, as well as many students with disabilities, both cognitive and physical, are having difficulty too. So we need to do something. This is one plan of action. And hopefully we'll get it passed. And I appreciate the majority chair and other senators backing me on this.
You mentioned Chromebooks. Do students have computers at home, or are they on their phones, or do they also have internet access at their houses?
It depends what student you're talking about. If you're in rural Pennsylvania, it wouldn't matter if you had a computer at home because there's no internet access. In many poorer areas, they also don't have internet access, and therefore you can give the Chromebook out, but that doesn't mean that someone knows how to use it and use it in terms of learning.
I've heard of several students say they were actually doing their homework on their phone. Have you heard of that also?
Yes, I have. And one of the ideas I've been trying to push is see if we can create platforms that work with iPhones, that work with cell phones. Because the one thing that every student has, whether you're poor, rich, or somewhere in between, is a cell phone. Most of the platforms are not designed for that. They're designed for a Chromebook or a computer. So this is another area that I think would help us.
We've seen the challenges facing some of the other states that are going back to school already. What happens if a staff member or a student tests positive for coronavirus?
Well, that's an interesting question, to say the least. When we met with the Secretary of Education, Secretary of Health, about a week ago, they didn't answer that question. They answered it on Friday and gave some instructions. So schools are to follow those guidelines and instructions. It doesn't necessarily mean that the whole school has to be closed. But again, the difficulty for schools is to get so many conflicting pieces of information from the county health department, from the state health department, from the Department of Education, all meaning to be helpful. But in the end, it creates confusion and it creates difficulty for parents to understand what's going on.
What would you do if you were a teacher right now? And you are a teacher. How do you feel about going back to school?
It depends on how safe the school has made itself. There are schools where the teachers and the administration have worked together to create safe environments. Such a school is Unionville School District, which is one of the best school districts in the Commonwealth. There are other districts where the administrators have done things but haven't brought in teachers for that discussion. I think you have to be sensitive to the fact that certain teachers can have medical problems either as themselves or in their family. And perhaps if you're using a hybrid approach, a blended approach, those teachers would focus on that rather than in the classroom itself.
Final question. Do you think schools should be closed on Election Day if they're used as polling places?
No, I don't. This is a very interesting question, I think, and an important question. If schools are public buildings, all right? I understand with nursing homes, all right, which are not necessarily public buildings. I think proper precautions should be made. I think only one room should be used, and due to the fact that most schools won't be open anyway because they're online, it's not going to be a problem. If you have hybrid learning, choose that day for your online. And in terms of schools that are there, you could create a tent outside, or you could create one room which has its own door. But they're public buildings, and I would hate to see public. By the way, this argument has been going on for a long, long time, as you know. And but I do think for those few schools that are going to be totally open, that we can do both with care. Just as any school that we're going to open, everything has to be done quite carefully.
We've been talking with Senator Andy Dinniman, a Democrat from Chester County. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Hey parents, looking for a fun summer activity for your kids? Let us help. Civics 101, the video game, is a great way to keep your child engaged and interested in learning about Pennsylvania. The more they learn about voting and our 3 branches of government, the further they advance through quizzes, fun reviews, and more. Start the learning today at PCNTV.com. PCN, Pennsylvania Politics and Policy.
Rick Schuettler is Executive Director of the Pennsylvania Municipal League. Rick, can you tell us a little bit about your organization and how a municipality has been challenged by the coronavirus pandemic?
Sure. Thanks, Todd. The League is a nonpartisan organization. Our mission is to strengthen, empower, and advocate for effective local government. We represent municipalities all across the Commonwealth, all the cities, and a number of other full-service municipalities, townships, and boroughs. It is, I think, hitting those municipalities that are in, when I say full service, I'm talking about police, fire, community development, planning offices, a full complement of services, hitting them rather hard. It's clearly starting to see some of the issues around revenue. Property tax, I think, is going to take a little longer to see that, but earned income tax and some of the other parking revenues, realty transfer, gross receipts tax are all starting to take its toll. And we're starting to see municipalities having to take action now. Their fiscal years will be calendar year, so they'll be starting to create their budgets over the next few months, but they're trying to get ahead of that a little bit. And frankly, it's not good. I mean, it's not looking real, the fiscal outlook is not good.
Has there been any relief yet from the federal government to local governments?
There has not. The CARES Act did provide some funding directly to Philadelphia that met the population threshold, and we're certainly happy for Philadelphia. And there were about 7 counties down in the southeast that also met that threshold. But the rest of the municipalities across Pennsylvania, certainly I'll speak for our members, have not received anything, federal dollars directly to them, or indirectly to them for that matter, and very little state dollars also.
What laws can the state pass at this level? I mean, everyone's going to be looking for money. How can we help get municipal governments through this crisis?
Well, that's frankly a much bigger question, Todd. I mean, we believe that the local government revenue system is very antiquated and that it should be looked at regardless of the pandemic. We're very reliant on municipalities on property taxes and earned income taxes, and really should be looking at that whole menu. But the Commonwealth could be allocating CARES Act funding, which they haven't done. It's gone to counties. We've seen very little back to local government. Some counties are starting to do a little bit there, but that's not going to be nearly enough. There are a lot of mandates. We've seen more mandates being passed onto local government than we are relief from mandates. And so there's a couple of big ones. There's a binding arbitration law, Act 111 for police. Extremely helpful going forward from an economic standpoint and a revenue standpoint and expense standpoint.
What sort of mandates have you encountered so far that maybe are too burdensome at the moment?
Well, the Act 17 required, for public safety personnel to receive any COVID-related leave. I'm not going to suggest to you that that's a huge number, but it's something. We saw some attempts on an amusement tax deferral and some things like that clearly would have been detrimental. Can't just we have nowhere else to go. We're limited. We have parameters built around us, both on the revenue and expense side. So very little creativity in regard to revenue expenses at the local government level.
Yeah, municipal tax bases and budgets definitely depend on residents working, paying property taxes, other taxes. How detail-oriented are the tax collections suffered from the pandemic so far? What can you tell us about those?
Sure. Well, National League of Cities, we are one of the 49 state leagues that make up the National League of Cities. National League of Cities issued a study a few months back that showed that Pennsylvania municipalities could be losing up to 40% of their revenue. And a lot of that is based on what you just said in terms of the unemployment rate and with earned income taxes. Now, that's going to evolve. The Independent Fiscal Office of the General Assembly looked at earned income tax and property taxes and of loss. National League just came out with another fiscal conditions survey today, and we're doing one of our own, but we think the loss is going to be pretty significant. And we think that, again, we're feeling it now, but it's those budgets for 21, as folks start to forecast, that I think are going to be, is the laying off of many public safety personnel. If you look at all these cities that are full service communities, cities, boroughs, and townships, you'll see that a big chunk of their budget is public safety, police, fire, etc. Well, if you're really gonna have to scale back your budgets significantly, you have to look at those areas. That means the furloughing and laying off of police officers and fire personnel. There's no other way around it. And that's going to hurt the quality of life in communities. It's going to hurt the ability to create amenities in your community, to make it a great place to live. And that's our fear.
Have there been cuts to municipal services, or have staffs been reduced as a result of COVID?
We have seen that in a number of our members so far. Yes, we have seen that in a number of our members. Scranton, I can name a few, Easton, Lancaster, Pittsburgh had furloughed and brought some back. They're already trying to take measures to get ahead of this. So yes, we have seen that.
With more people working from home, how have downtowns and business owners coped with the loss of revenue?
Well, you know, most of these communities that I mentioned to you are built on mom and pop businesses. And so there's no question it's having a huge impact. First of all, if the restaurant's not open or the bar isn't open, people aren't coming downtown. They're not putting money in meters or a parking deck, and people aren't coming to work in those communities. So you're absolutely right. It's all affecting that. And really, our concern is what's next? When does it end? And when can we see at least some partial comeback so these communities can recover? That's what's so important. If we don't recover local governments, the Commonwealth isn't going to recover. We represent too much of that Commonwealth, and if we have these hollowed out cores that are not seeing any reinvestment coming, you know, and things coming back, Commonwealth is not going to recover.
And municipalities who were under financial distress before 2020, now facing additional strains due to the pandemic, how are those counties and cities going to help get back together?
Well, honestly, if we stay where we are right now, I think the Department of Community and Economic Development is going to see a real influx of communities applying for Act 47, which is the state's fiscal distress, you know, municipality fiscal distress law. And they're going to see the precursor to that, which is this strategic management planning program. They're going to see people entering into that. They're going to get overwhelmed because communities are going to have nowhere to go, no way to raise revenues. Certain expenses they can't cut. They're mandated via, as I told you before, binding arbitration law. I think that there's going to be a real overwhelming of that department in order to deal with all these communities.
And how is Act 47 funded?
It's appropriation from the General Assembly.
Yeah, so many people are going to need appropriations from the General Assembly. One positive, I think, out of this is that city parks and other places are being used more. Are we seeing some stressors on some of the maintenance and staffing for those?
We have seen a bit of that. Certainly, it's great. People want to get outside, and that's a great thing. And you know, all of our communities, our mayors and council folks really want to encourage that. But there have been some issues with trying to keep up with the services associated with that. We've seen some municipal waste issues, and not necessarily related to what you just said, but there are issues with staffing and being able to cope. Sometimes that local governments are employers. So what the business community is dealing with, as with their businesses, we deal with too. We're putting people out there. We have an obligation to protect those people and not expose them, yet we also want to be able to provide the municipal services that are needed to the constituents of the community.
That's good information. We've been talking with Rick Schuettler, a Executive Director of the Pennsylvania Municipal League. Thank you for your time, and thank you for what you do.
Thanks, Todd. Appreciate it.
The eyes of the nation are on Pennsylvania as a key influencer to the 2020 election. PCN has over 25 years of trusted state government coverage. Our network is your platform to connect directly with Pennsylvania voters. Whether it's a presidential race, statewide campaign, or local cause, our viewers are ready to hear from you. Book your ad now. PCN, your access to Pennsylvania voters.
We're here with Hurubie Mecco, who's a staff reporter with the LNP and LancasterOnline. You recently wrote an article about a state program that helps renters who became unemployed or underemployed during the pandemic. Can you tell us a little bit about the program and its purpose?
Sure. So the program was launched in early July, and it's supposed to be rental assistance for anyone who has lost their job due to the COVID pandemic since March, or anyone who has lost at least 30% of their income. So the program is supposed to work through the Pennsylvania Housing Finance Agency, and the state agency then contracts organizations within the 67 counties to then get applications and disperse the funds. So what I've found is in the beginning, it seems like there were some hiccups that have been reported with the program, but after a couple of weeks, at least the Lancaster agencies seem to have, the authorities seem to have gotten into a good rhythm and they were processing the applications. However, at least from what they're saying, the way that the law is written has put in limitations onto which families or which households can actually get the funds.
How much money is earmarked for Lancaster County and how much has been approved and awarded so far?
So far in Lancaster County, it's been $2 million that was earmarked. And at this point, or at least last week, about $52,000 had been dispersed, about $53,000.
Is there a deadline for applicants to apply?
Yes, so the deadline currently stands at the end of September. Meanwhile, the governor's moratorium on evictions ends the end of this month as of now.
What did you learn about the number of applications submitted in the rent relief program and versus the number approved?
So at least in Lancaster County, 256 applications had been submitted as of last week. And of those, about 194 had been approved, meaning that they had either they had been receiving unemployment benefits, or they were able to prove that they had lost 30% of their income. And of those, only 19 were approved to actually start getting funding. So that would be where the $53,000 comes in.
So there's still a lot of room for a lot of applications to be approved by the deadline. Is there a way for people to understand how to apply?
By going to the state agency or the Pennsylvania Finance Housing Agency's website and reading through the different applications. But there are multiple applications that need to be submitted. So initially, the tenant has to submit 3 applications. Those have to be processed. And then the county agency will work with each tenant to figure out if they are approved and then contact the landlord and try to process it that way.
Does the program cover 100% of the rent?
It does not. So the way the legislation is written, it says either 100% of the rent or up to $750 a month. And it's approved for 6 months if the person can get the funds. So the cap is currently at about $4,500.
Did your research discover what the average rents are in Lancaster County?
It did. So from the county authority, I was given figures. And for a 2-bedroom apartment, it's about $1,021 on average. That would be fair market housing prices. So if the person was approved for funds, they would still have $271 that they would need to make up.
So the average rent is a lot higher than $750 in Lancaster County, especially for an individual versus a family.
It is. So that's another kink within the actual legislation that I was told about, is that the landlord would have to accept that $750 as the only rent that they would be getting from that tenant.
So if their rent is higher than $750 and the landlord doesn't sign off on it, what happens then?
Then disqualified.
Have any landlords balked at participating, or have you seen any numbers there?
Yes. Well, I haven't been given specific numbers, but just anecdotally, I was told by multiple people that landlords had been balking and they had decided to just wait for eviction or have been trying to figure out a different way.
Is there a date by which the CARES Act money has to be distributed? It's different than the deadline?
So for this program, I believe that the program itself stops September. However, I think just like the CARES funds, it would be November for the actual deadline.
Okay. You were dealing with the Lancaster Housing and Redevelopment Authority. Have you been reporting on housing issues in Lancaster County for a while?
I have not, actually. This was really my first housing related story that I had covered. And it's very interesting, especially with the moratorium on evictions coming up at the end of this month. It seems like there might be a lot to cover.
So Governor Wolf extended the moratorium, or he implemented a moratorium, and the moratorium is coming up, is ending soon, correct? The moratorium, yeah? Is that ends at the end of September?
The moratorium ends at the end of August, actually. So that is coming up sooner than the deadline for this program.
And again, where can people go to apply for this? That's the Pennsylvania Housing Finance Agency website, correct?
Correct. And then through that, you can also find your county level agency. So as you said, for Lancaster, it's the Lancaster Housing and Redevelopment Authority.
So the state agency is sort of the pass-through agency of the federal money, and then your actual application goes into the local agency?
And then the local agency would handle that. The state agency, there is an amount of money allocated for mortgages, and I believe the state agency would be the one that receives those applications.
So does this program apply to mortgages as well as rents?
The law itself does earmark a certain amount for mortgages, but then the bulk of the money would be going to renters. So 150 million has to be spent at least on renters.
Okay, we've been talking to Hurubie Meko, staff reporter with LNP and Lancaster Online. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much.
PCN is working to help keep Pennsylvanians informed as restrictions are lifted across the state. Join us for Coronavirus Impact, a discussion with civic, business, and government leaders on COVID-19's impact on life during and after the pandemic in Pennsylvania. Watch on cable and stream free on the PCN app.